Donald Trump actually delivered on one of the things that many Republicans assumed was just an impossibility. He got rid of the Department of Education. This was the signing ceremony yesterday in the East Room at the White House, and it was an amazing thing to behold. Not only the fact that he was doing it and actually doing as much as he could in the executive branch to get rid of the Department of Education, but the optics were fantastic. You know, optics is a word that's sort of overused in political analysis, but optics matter. What things look like. I've mentioned this before. Donald Trump understands the showmanship and theatricality and the visual nature of the presidency. And the fact that he was in the East Room with that backdrop, what do we see? We see the flag of each state, because the money is now going to go to the states. The power and decision-making ability will go to the states. If you look at the founding language of the legislative act that created the Department of Education, they pretended like there was nothing in this law that was going to infringe on the state's right to control the education of the children in that state. Of course, it got out of control immediately. And ever since Ronald Reagan, the first president after Jimmy Carter, created this abomination in 1979, ever since Ronald Reagan, every Republican has vowed to destroy the Department of Education, and none of them were able to. Now, Donald Trump can't single-handedly destroy the Department of Education, but he can do quite a bit to make sure that it goes away and that the money that is right now funneled through this endless chain of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., everybody trying to take their own bit of it, will eventually get to those kids who were sitting on little desks behind Donald Trump with their own versions of the executive order and citing it themselves, because that's the other part of these optics. It's for those kids. And those kids were getting the buy-in along with their parents in the audience. And my favorite part is that a good majority of those kids who were signing are homeschooled, because they've already gotten their kids out of public education because it's been such a failure. Now, the reaction to this has been, well, kind of predictable on the left. You're going to hear from Randi Weingarten now. She is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. She, along with the National Education Association, that's the entity. Those are the two entities that represent the public school teachers. They're union bosses. She's going to say a lot about, you know, teaching our kids and taking care of our kids and saving our kids. Just so you know, Randi Weingarten does not have any kids. So when she says our kids, she's talking about your kids. And she thinks she knows best about your kids. You're going to hear a lot from Randi Weingarten. But I want you to take note before you start seeing these clips about what you're not going to hear from her. What you're not going to hear Randi Weingarten or anyone else from any of the teachers' unions or any of the Democrats who are going to die on this Department of Education hill, or any of the people in the media who are trying to scare you to tell you that children without disabilities are not going to get any special needs classes. Just so you know, you're going to hear a lot of that from them. What you're not going to hear from them is, look at our great track record. Look at all of the great things we've done. Look at our achievements. Look at our GPAs. Look at our literacy rates. Look at all the great things that the Department of Education has done. Look at our successful track record. You don't hear anything like that from them. All you hear from them is fear-mongering. They're trying to scare you about what they're telling you is going to happen, not all the great things they have done for the last 4 decades. All right, Randi Weingarten, take it away.
What the department does is there's about $100 billion. So a kid who has disabilities, a kid who is poor, a kid who's going to Head Start, a kid who's in a rural area, kid who is in a career tech ed program, a kid who gets a Pell Grant, a kid who's limited English proficient. Every single one of those kids, which are essentially most of our kids in public schools, they get basically 10% of every dollar that's spent on them is from the Department of Education.
Wow. Like I said, look at all of these kids who are going to get harmed because of all of that money. $100 billion. You getting your money's worth there, are you? $100 billion. How much of that stays in Washington, D.C. and never actually makes it to your kid's school? And let me just say, I don't talk about it much here, but I will in this context because it's relevant. I'm the father of 4 children. 2 of those kids are special needs children. Randi Weingarten, take my special needs kids' names out of your damn mouth. because I don't know where you were, or the members of your union were, or the party you support blindingly. I don't know where they were, or the entire Department of Education and the professional public school apparatus. I don't know where any of them were during the pandemic when my special needs kids had to learn from a laptop at the kitchen table because they weren't allowed to go back into school, despite the fact that they had a legal binding IEP contract that said that they got an individualized education protocol because of those special needs. And you're now using my kids as a prop and as a weapon to keep your cronyism alive? Oh, go yourself. Sorry about that. Oh, you're also going to hear about the huge percentage of special needs kids who rely on the public schools. I got something to say about that too. We'll get to it in a second.
The biggest concern is all the opportunity gaps that the federal government provides through the Department of Education. The federal education role is limited. There's no, except for, the Department of Defense schools, which are not run from the Department of Education, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs schools that are not run by the Department of Education. It doesn't control any schools. In fact, it's the states that control schools. So if President Trump doesn't like what's happening in education, it's the states and local school boards that do it.
Such a disingenuous statement here, because they've got the local school districts and the states addicted to that crack pipe of federal money. See, they've convinced the governors and the county supervisors and the school boards that they don't have to raise taxes. No, they're going to get this big gift from the federal government. Here's all the money. So you can now use your dollars there in the local jurisdictions or the state jurisdictions on whatever great idea you've got. And you don't have to raise any taxes. We'll pay for your schools. And they're like, oh, that's great. Fantastic. We're getting federal money. Not knowing that, of course, federal money is all coming from the same place, too. It's all coming from the taxpayers. But see, your governor doesn't get in trouble because he's raised your taxes, because it's those guys in Washington that have raised your taxes, and the money's coming back to you theoretically. However, here's the problem. And Randi Weingarten knows this. The Department of Education gets all those local jurisdictions addicted to the crack pipe of federal funds. And so they're like relying on all the federal money. We got to have that federal money. Give us that federal money. And then it's some nameless, faceless, unelected, corrupt bureaucrat sitting in some cubicle in Washington, D.C. that says, oh, sure, Arkansas, we'd love to give you that money, but we're attaching this string to it. You can have this money, but you got to put this in the curriculum, and you have to do this in your hiring practices, and you got to have these they, them bathrooms, and this, and that, and that, and that, and that. And before you know it, there's a whole lot of strings sticking out of every single one of those dollars, and she knows it. I'm glad she admits the Department of Education is really just a funding apparatus for the states. In fact, based on her argument, you can certainly do exactly what the Department of Education does right now and let the schools make all of those decisions with no strings attached. In fact, she just sort of conceded that point, didn't she? A little bit more from Randi, because if her lips are moving, you know she's lying.
COVID was a terrible time for us. And as you know, because I was on your show a lot and other shows, right, I wanted schools to be reopened as early as April of 2020. The issue was the fear, and the issue was the safety issues. But COVID has really hurt in so many ways. But this has been a Republican talking point for a long time. And
yeah, it's been a Republican talking point for a long time because it's true. And how do I know it's true? Because I was alive and conscious during that time. It wasn't that long ago, Rands. We all saw it. We know it for a fact. And this is a little media trick that people do when they appear on cable news. You'll see it a lot, especially from the left, where they'll try to ingratiate themselves to a host that, forgive me, Brianna, you're just not that smart and not well educated and not well researched for an interview like this. So basically, she's able to put one over on her. When she says something to Brianna Keilar, she says, as you know, you see, and then the host is in a position of saying, well, yes, of course I know. We're both smart. Or the host can be honest and say, oh, actually, I don't know that. Can you give me evidence of what you're saying? See, but they're never going to say that because then it reveals to the audience that they don't know as much as the guest. So the guest says, as you know, and Breonna Keeler just goes, yeah. And it sort of adds a fact check to the lie that she was just telling. So watch her do that again.
COVID was a terrible time for us. And as you know, because I was on your show a lot and other shows, I wanted schools to be reopened.
Did you see what happened? So she says, as you know, and Breonna Keeler agrees before she even says what Breonna Keeler is supposed to know. It's a trick. It's a trick. Guests do this all the time. It's a little media trick they learn. So, as you know, Randi Weingarten wanted the schools open as early as April of 2020. Well, boy, it's too bad we don't live in a world where every single appearance of Randi Weingarten on cable news during the course of the pandemic wasn't captured on video that we can then play back and check to see if she's lying or not. Boy, it's too bad that we do live in a world like that. We definitely live in a world where we have every single thing she said during the pandemic. So what did she just tell Breonna? As you know, I wanted schools open as early as April of 2020. Okay, let's roll it, Randi.
And if people are in high risk, they shouldn't be in school. They should be doing things remotely. Just because Donald Trump wants to take a risk with people who go to bars or beaches, those of us who have spent our life teaching kids are not going to take a risk with kids or with our members' lives. Remote and hybrid are really the only two ways you can reopen schools safely. You got to delay school opening because if you don't have the mask, how are you going to be able to do this? There's a huge difference between working in Walmart and working in a school. You know, even a situation like Florida, where it was pretty clear that schools should not reopen, and where Miami schools did not reopen because you had people who were courageous and who were willing to defy DeSantis's denials.
And why are they closing now?
Martha, they're closing now because what the city said, and frankly, what lots of other places are also seeing, is a huge skyrocketing increase.
Now
in
you're not listening to me. What they're telling us, though, is that the wisest scientific move is to have children in school.
Is that they're trying to figure out a regional way of opening and closing, like they did after
they
the
don't need to
Jewish
close.
holidays.
That's the point.
In the
They
middle
don't need to close. Is the point,
Martha?
That when you hit that,
No,
it says a
the
measurement
mayor
established
said-
by the teachers
the
union
mayor-
over the summer in order to reach an agreement to reopen in the
No.
first place was a 3% threshold.
The mayor set the 3% threshold. What the teachers union did in New York City afterwards was to say, these are the safeguards that we need, and this is the testing we need.
They didn't want the schools open. She did not want the schools open. The union. This goes on for 7 minutes. And thank you to the great guys at Grabien and Tom Elliott for putting this together. They're indispensable, those guys, because yes, we live in a world where we have every single appearance of Randi Weingarten all through the pandemic. We're only in November of 2020. This continued into the fall of 21. She did not spend any time using her posture, her position, her platform, and her incredible political persuasion in the terms of union dollars, where she owns those politicians that they support. She didn't use any of that to try to get the schools open for our kids. Every single one of these appearances, she's there fighting. You just saw her fighting with Martha McCallum to keep those schools closed, to harm your kids. What happened yesterday at the White House with President Trump would have never happened if it weren't for the pandemic. Not only because it pissed you off and you finally got into a place where you had enough, but you also got to see exactly how your kids were learning. You got to see exactly how your kids' teachers performed. You got to see exactly what was in that curriculum. You got to see exactly what was going on in your public schools because you were home too. And you learned quite a bit, didn't you? Yeah, this has been an educational experience for all of us. So in a way, I guess we should thank Anthony Fauci. If it weren't for him and if it weren't for Randi Weingarten, we'd still have a Department of Education. Okay, technically, we still have a Department of Education. Even with the president's executive order yesterday, that's not going to get rid of the department. It now needs to go to the legislature. And there's some Republican congressmen who are, in fact, drafting legislation to officially end the Department of Education. Here's the problem, because, well, you went to school back in a time where Randi Weingarten wasn't in charge, and you probably watched Schoolhouse Rock. You know how this works. You get the House to pass it, you get the Senate to pass it, and then you get the president to sign it. No problem, except for that filibuster thing. You see, in the Senate, any bill needs 60 votes, not 51, 60 votes. And I doubt you're going to get 7 Democrats to cross Randi Weingarten and the teachers union. So now what? What's going to happen? What are we going to do if this thing goes down into defeat because of the cloture vote in the Senate, because of the filibuster? Well, there is a way. And you need to let your congressman know about this. It's called reconciliation. Now, we get into the weeds sometimes here because we're a Washington, D.C. based show, but we respect your intelligence and we know you can follow along on this. A reconciliation bill is a bill that is passed in the House and the Senate that does not require a filibuster-proof 60-vote majority in the Senate. The only caveat is it's got to be, everything in that reconciliation bill must be an item of legislation that affects the budget and taxes and spending. Well, I got to tell you, the existence of the Department of Education definitely affects our budget and it affects spending. And the elimination of that department is a perfect candidate for this great, big, beautiful reconciliation bill that's being crafted right now. You need to let your congressman know that you want the elimination of the Department of Education in that reconciliation bill. This is where the rubber hits the road. And this is where Republicans aren't allowed to just say, oh, yeah, I want to get rid of the Department of Education. We did our best, but what are you going to do? It didn't pass the filibuster. Oh, well, I guess you need to give us a 60-seat majority in the Senate. Until then, there's nothing else we can do. We see right through that. We've seen it before. We've seen it way too many times. This is the moment. This is the opportunity. Everyone's having fun with yesterday's signing ceremony, and it was great. But the next time there's a Democrat in the White House, all that money goes right back into the Department of Education with all those strings attached. So if you want to really get rid of it, now's the time. Now's the time. Eliminate the Department of Education, not with President Trump's signature on an executive order, but with his signature on the reconciliation package. Let's go.